its cardiac monitoring policy and has spun off several other programs. And so it's just an example of one thing which grew and grew and grew and grew, and actually now is having meaningful impact in our program. So how do you get these things going? I would encourage you to do two things. One is Dr. Ford's talk this morning, and many others like it, will show you how to, in the comments that were made just a minute ago, of how to do research and the important things and the things that patients are concerned about I think are very important to learn how to do research well. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to read leadership books. It's not the people, it's the right people, comes out of Good to Great. And you can take any of the leadership books, mentoring books, and the principles that you learn about building a team and trying to achieve a goal, I think directly apply to what we're trying to accomplish here. And so it isn't the people that are important, it's the right people. When our LCAP program started, there was 2 co-PIs who were running the program, and when I came to Christiana, it had been open for 6 months. Not one patient had been accrued, and they were still trying to figure out what was going to happen. And I asked if I could participate. We've changed the team a little bit, and everything changed. And so it's making sure that you have the people that are doing the work, that are involved in getting the patients and doing everything about it, that they're the right people. And you will encounter people that aren't the right people, and you can leave them included, but you need to direct your efforts to the right people. You need to have the right program. It needs to speak to a need. You need to have the right support, and that is probably, they're all important, otherwise you're not going to succeed. But if you're trying to swim upstream and you have no support, either from your physician, the team members that are putting this together, your supervisors, the hospital or university, it's going to be very difficult to achieve anything. You need to have the right marketing. And that's what we're talking about with trust, with how do you get the information out there. Are you trying to pull patients into you, or are you trying to have them pushed to you by their physicians? Usually it's both. And so how do you approach patients? Is it faith-based? Is it working with their primary care? You need to have collaboration at all levels. You need to have your leadership alignment and buy-in. And you need to have buy-in from your collaborators, and you need to have buy-in from your patients. And relatively simple concept, how you achieve that is exceedingly difficult. But it's through taking the time. It's through everything that was said about trust earlier. And so I'm not going to go into all of that again or elaborate, but you need to spend the time with your patients and your physicians explaining why you're doing it. And in a way, you're selling it, but not that you're selling a used car. If you have a great product, if you have an excellent research program, then it's relatively easy to elicit patients and physicians who want to be part of it. And those that don't, that's okay. And there were many people that were against lung cancer screening from the beginning. There are people still that are. But it was the persistence of just doing it and focusing on the people who wanted to be part of it, and then periodically going back to the people who were less enthusiastic and not saying, see, I told you so, you were wrong, but working with them and saying, this has been working well, how can I help you, how can I help your patients, and that continued dialogue over and over again. Again, I didn't focus on the people who said no, I focused on the people who said yes, but we always came back to those other people and continued to increase collaboration. And finally, I was at a leadership physician boot camp a little bit ago, and they were talking about different projects that you want to get done in your program. They weren't talking specifically about research, but they were talking about just getting team projects done. And they had the WIFM, which stands for What's in it for me. And whether people state that or not, everybody thinks it. physicians are very busy. Patients, for all the reasons that we all know, question about participating in research. And so in terms of getting buy-in from your physicians, it's hard to pay them money to do research. However, there are things that you can facilitate their ability to get their work done and do the research. And that can be with resources or personnel, like providing them with a student to say, you don't have to go hire somebody. We're going to provide you with a student who has been trained, who has gone through all the paperwork, who already has their ID card, who already has their academic lecture set up for the whole summer. You don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is work with them. Publications, encourage them in that sense. The notoriety, to include them into the research that you're doing that elevates their stature, and provide them with additional resources. And then other things, everyone likes to talk about the carrot, not so much the stick. One of the things at the Graham Center that Dr. Petrelli set up was, if you want to be part of it, you have to put patients on clinical trials. There is that is tracked, and there is a very, very, very low bar to participate. But there are accrual listings. When we do a different program, every Tuesday we run a conference, and I list everyone's name up there with how many patients they have on a trial. And we all have the same patients, we all have the same ability, and you will see people who individually have a third or a half of the patients on any given trial, and everyone else is at a very low level. And they have to be able to justify to themselves and their peers why their time's more valuable than everybody else's, why they're not interested, why the trial's not good for them. And that elevates everybody and rises everyone up to a high level. And finally, in terms of competitions, one thing on that is I set up a research competition, and I'll tell you that Dr. Weintraub's group of cardiologists far and away had the highest number of publications submitted for our residency interview, or our residency essay competition. But we went to all the different residencies at Christiana and said, we're going to have a competition, which residents are doing the most research, and encourage them and reward them. And I think competitions in that sense, it just keeps us all honest and encourages us to do what we do just a little bit better. And so thank you for your time.
All right, and finally, actually, I want to put up his picture. Finally, we have Dr. Gregory Hicks. And I will say that Dr. Hicks is, to me, a new friend. So I might not have any, personal stories to bring. But I will say this, Dr. Hicks comes from us from the University of Delaware. He is a leader in physical therapy, and he's chosen what is really a particularly difficult problem that we physicians are interested in and want to get his expertise around, and that is low back pain. And I'm going to get his slides up, and here we go.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here today. So today, Heather and I had a really good conversation. As she said, we're new friends. We had a good long conversation about what I should really talk about at this conference. And one of the things that we came down to was this idea of how, as a non-physician researcher, how do you build partnerships with community physicians? And as we talked about that, I started to really, I think, sharpen the question a bit more, and this idea that it has to be mutually beneficial and the research partnership has to be collaborative. I think on the researcher side, I think we have the danger and the audacity at times to think that we know best, and we can be a bit prescriptive with how we approach people to be involved with our research. And I think it's important for us to really engage people so that they not just feel like they're a partner in the relationship, but that they actually are a partner in the research that's happening. So when we talk about partnerships, this definition, it really is all about relationship building. And so it's a relationship characterized by mutual cooperation and responsibility as for the achievement of a specified goal. Now, as long as you keep that in mind, and you really do have a common goal that you're trying to achieve with your partner, everything's gonna move forward, you're gonna maintain balance. The problem comes in when someone loses sight of the goal. So if someone sees another carrot dangling or there's another stick approaching, as Dr. Barrow just talked about, they can be distracted from that goal. I think one of the really important things for us to think about if we're trying to engage community physicians in research is that it can't just be the research goal. There has to be a goal that's important on the side of the community partner as well. So how do we really do this? How do we build these sorts of relationships? And so this is really the path that I've taken in building most of my relationships with my research partners. First thing you have to do is to identify key leaders who are really going to help you garner support. I think a lot of times we think that's the physician who's the head of the practice. That's not always the case. There have been times when I've had complete intellectual and philosophical buy-in from the physician who's the head of a practice. We start moving forward with the research project, nothing happens. Then I all of a sudden realize, you know, it's this person who is the office manager who really controls the day-to-day operations. Get them connected, get buy-in from them, all of a sudden the project moves forward. So it's not always who you think it is, and you really have to figure out who are your key partners that make the most sense for you. Next is determining and agreeing on common goals. So again, like I said, not just the research goal, but what is your partner going to get out of it? Once you have those common goals, then you can move forward. Next is identifying barriers. And I'm going to talk about both the common goals and the barriers in a little bit more detail in the next slide, so I'm going to move past them right now. Obviously, the next thing you need to do is develop strategies in order to be able to handle those barriers and to achieve your common goals. And then the last piece, which I think is really, really crucial, is this idea of having regular check-ins with your partners. If they feel like they just wanted me to get this research up and running, now they've got it going, they've forgotten about what my needs are as a community partner, that puts a sour taste in the partner's mouth. And so you've got to make sure that you continue to go back. Are we good? Are we going in the right direction? So buy-in is the key. We've had people talk about this already. These are the two areas where I think buy-in is so crucial. And if you don't get it right here, you're going to have trouble. The first is this idea of finding common goals or alignment of priorities. So if the partner that you're trying to work with values research in the same way that you do, for example, they're at an institution where publications and grants are the currency in that institution, that's a much easier scenario. But if that's not the case, then you've got to figure out what other factors potentially could motivate someone to want to participate in research with you. For some, that's going to be identifying the altruistic components to involvement in research. What are potential benefits to the patient, to future participants in studies? Maybe it's that you're going to help improve process of care within the organization through setting up all the methods for your research project. Maybe it's that you're acquiring additional resources, getting EMR set into place in a system, or getting tablets for physicians to record data on. Things that actually make life better for your partner will really help with this buy-in. But you've got to figure out, how do we find common ground and move forward from there? The next one is a full recognition on the part of the researcher of what the barriers to research are. And what I'll say is really critical here is that you as a researcher, you have to figure out, before you even go to the meeting with the physician the first time, what are the potential barriers? What things are going to get in the way of this community partner being involved with research? That is showing respect. If you go into that situation with some understanding, and that partner understands that you really have tried to figure out where are there going to be problems, they will respect you much more. Your relationship will get off on a better foot. So really identifying those barriers is critical. Now for me as a clinician scientist, I'm a physical therapist by training, been a researcher for more than a decade now. I use everything that's in my wheelhouse to help me figure out, how do I best partner with someone? So the one hat I put on is the clinician hat. I was a physical therapist practicing for several years, was a director of a clinic with a big budget, so I understand the ins and outs of a clinical environment. So once you understand that, what you really want to come to that community partner with is, we're going to figure out a way to do this research that's not going to interrupt the flow of care in your practice. That's the critical piece there. The next is my experience. I spent the first, I paid for my PhD work by working as a trials coordinator. So I spent a lot of time recruiting subjects, being the man on the ground, in physician practices, recruiting participants. So I've got that real world experience, which helped me to figure out, you've got to figure out what resources are really needed so that you're not interrupting the flow of care for the practice. Now, as most researchers can tell you, I've had successful partnerships, I've had unsuccessful partnerships, sometimes within the context of one study. So if I think back to my first research experiences working as a trials coordinator, I was at the University of Pittsburgh. I would actually go into an occupational health physician practice group, and I would recruit patients with acute work-related low back pain. Now, one of the main things I had to do there was to be as unobtrusive as possible. So I took my laptop, all my work, I would sit there and I'd wait. I'd talk to front desk staff, find out who's slated to come in, put a note on the chart for the physician to say, can I speak to this patient afterwards? Go right in, talk to the patient. I just tried to stay out of the way as much as possible. The thing is that requires a significant amount of resources to have someone who can be in place in a practice like that. And so that is certainly an issue financially, whether or not your research program can support that level of effort. But that's on one spectrum of what I think is probably the best case scenario. Right now, I'm the PI for a NIH-funded project where we're recruiting 250 older adults with low back pain. Now, initially, our goal was to recruit all these patients through primary care practices. So we talked with roughly 20 some odd practices. We had 38 physicians on board who were ready to recruit for us. That was one part of the equation in terms of recruitment. We also worked with folks at Christiana through family and community medicine with Dr. Rosenthal, Dr. Sandella. We set up a system there where we could actually pay part of a physician's salary as a co-investigator on the grant. So that was another pathway through which we were going to recruit through those primary care practices. Now what happened was, once we got things rolling with our community partners, the non-Christiana side, it became apparent within the first few months this wasn't going to work because we didn't have the resources we needed to be in place in all of those practices. We actually hired someone who was a retention and recruitment coordinator to go from site to site. It wasn't enough for the study to be unobtrusive in those practices, and it just didn't work. Now, our partnership with Christiana has been a very different scenario because we actually were able to partner with someone who really has the same sort of desire to be involved with research. We're able to pay a portion of salary that would actually go towards the research. So within the context of one study, we had successes and non-successes. But the thing was, I was completely aware of what I was walking into with trying to work with these outside community groups. I knew that going into it, but I was hopeful that we could make it work, and it didn't. So we figured out how to move forward in a better way. So bottom line is really build those relationships in the best possible way that you can and get people to really buy into what you're trying to do. Thank you.
Okay, so as promised, we, well, first of all, we ran a little bit over, but as promised, we still will have some time for questions. Basically, you know, anybody who has a question, do we want to get a microphone over to this? Go ahead and stand up so they can find you real quick there.
Thank you. This question is for Drs. Manos and Hicks. I was a little concerned that some of the strategies that were proposed to increase trust in the minority community may in fact have the opposite effect, because on the surface, the statements didn't appear to be true. For example, if you were to say, I won't steal your patients, But if the client feels that they're getting better care because they're in this study, they will switch physicians. If you say that there is no benefit to me, no personal gain, when in fact one of the expected outcomes of research is that you will publish and that you will gain some notoriety and respect in your field, which will lead to greater resources. So how might you reshape those statements so that they don't appear to be false? Because if they appear to be false, that's in fact going to say, well, why should I trust anything that you say? Because you're not being completely honest or not being completely transparent.
Okay, I'll answer first, and I'll let Dr. Hicks respond. So we say, you know, are you limiting the patient from being able to go to the new physician? And so one of the things we try to do is to make sure that we assure I mean, obviously patients can go wherever they want, but we try to assure the community physicians that the investigator at the academic health center isn't going to take it. Now, one option is, and we've done this in, for example, you know, Parkinson's studies, is that maybe the option is co-management of patients. That if they come in, that the primary care folks send somebody in, but they're co-managing. And so we've looked into that on a variety of things. We're also doing that in one where we're doing on ablation for atrial fibrillation. So it's co-management. So it's not taking them, but it's also making sure they get the best care possible. The second issue you said was, what's the benefit? Well, unfortunately, you know, this is always one that we struggle with because in an informed consent, when you're in a randomized trial, for example, we don't know what the answer is. We have to have equipoise when we go in. So we can't say there's going to be a direct benefit to somebody. Now, the benefit may be that they get some free care or free workup, but being in the actual trial or the study doesn't have any. Now, if you're the referring physician, I think this was brought up by Dr. Bauer as well, as one of the things that we would suggest is that build them in, give them some recognition, put their name on allow them the opportunity to be an author of the publication. That actually gives them some benefit, also gives them intellectual stimulation. But for the patient themselves, I mean, I think it's very difficult to sort of promise them something that they're not going to get. And the reason why I mentioned equipoise is because I think that the problem that comes up, and I'll be honest, this comes actually not really so much from doing research, but actually working in medical education research. So having been the Associate Dean for Assessment Evaluation, everybody wants whatever the new curricular intervention, everybody just wants to adopt it because it's new, whether or not it's actually been proven to work or not, which is actually a big problem because can you withhold the new one from paying customers who are students? You got students who may be paying $50,000, $60,000 a year. Do you withhold the new one, or is the standard of care, the current one, actually what we know basically works? So we have to wrestle with those things as well, as far as we have to basically say, we don't know if it works any better. But, so, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually didn't talk about minority recruitment. I'm happy to speak about it for a minute. I think that one of the issues we're always concerned about is making sure that we have equitable healthcare across the board. I think particularly with the type of research I do, my whole goal in partnering with physicians is that ultimately their practice will move to a different level. And we can never, you know, as Chip said, we can never guarantee patients that they will have a benefit from the research that they participate in. The only thing we can say is that we're hopeful that this research will move research forward and move practice care forward for all patients.
Other questions? I think we have a little bit more time if anybody else wants to ask. Very little. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. Well, I just want to, again, I want to thank this wonderful panel for coming up and having their time, and certainly they'll be around today later if you have other questions.
Thank you so much. I'm going to invite our other panel to come up while I'm talking. Our next panel is called "Standing Between You and Lunch." No, I'm sorry. That's my notes here. This next panel is actually on engaging communities in research, and it is a bit of a balance to some of the questions that I heard about and some of the thoughts raised in the other panel. So I hope you're going to think carefully about this and have some great questions lined up for this group as well. I'm going to let my colleague Dr. Jenkins introduce this panel, and I will introduce her. Carolyn Jenkins is the Anne Darlington Edwards Endowed Chair and Professor at the College of Nursing at our partner Medical University of South Carolina. She is also the Director for the Center for Community Health Partnerships at the South Carolina Clinical and Translational Research Institute, and she is going to introduce the rest of the panelists. So please join me in welcoming the panel.
Thank you, and it's a real privilege to be here, and I'll start out by apologizing for my raspy voice. An allergy attack on the plane yesterday with no air conditioning. So greetings from South Carolina, and we certainly are very happy to be a part of the panel. And so as we look at community engagement, what we know is that the Institute of Medicine in their recommendations said that we should ensure community engagement in all phases of research. And as academicians, we frequently are engaged in research, in teaching, and in service. And then we superimpose community engagement on that. And many of us may have started with community engagement. The challenge is that engaging the community takes a bit more time for research, and frequently that's not built into the research process. And I think we've defined community engagement. We've seen the increasing levels of community engagement from Dr. Ford. And back in 2001, Larry Green and colleagues said that the minimum level of participation in community engagement is that stakeholders be involved in the beginning and the end. And the maximum is that they are active participants in all, or partners in all phases of the research. And so we have three wonderful panelists who are going to talk about their role in community engagement. Dr. Spencer will go first, Dr. Colon, and then Dr. Hassick. And so trying to save my voice, I'm going to let them introduce themselves very briefly and talk about their projects. Dr. Spencer first.
Good afternoon. I am a senior research scientist at Nemours Health and Prevention Services, and I'd like to start this morning by talking about the many stages of research and determining the need to the dissemination of data that could really be enhanced through community partnerships and engagement. And I'd like to do that by focusing on two phases in particular. The first being the research design, informed by better understanding the needs of communities, as well as the data collection, by giving a couple of examples. And in 1993, needle exchange was the primary form of preventing HIV/AIDS in neighborhood health centers in Boston. However, within the health center that I was working in, it was not effective as an approach. And part of the reason had to do because it didn't necessarily address the specific needs of the community. The health center was located in a predominantly African American, African, Haitian, and Latino community. And some of the issues that residents were dealing with had to do with rates of homelessness, poverty, substance abuse, as well as better understanding perceptions of the role of sex